So what's really happening in the Cambridgeshire rental market? Now, most letting agents that I talk to will tell me what they think is happening in the rental market. We, however, can show you what's actually happening because every month we collect and analyse the evidence ourselves. We track rents by postcode and property size, the number of homes available, how many are being let, applicant demand, and what's actually happening across the portfolio that we manage. And that matters because the advice about your rent, your marketing, changing legislation should never be based on guesswork. It's got to be based on what's actually happening in the market where your property is located. Now, you may have read that rents are continuing to rise, and they are. The average rent across the portfolio that we manage has now reached £1,243 per month, and that's 8% higher than it was a year ago, an extraordinary 54% higher than in 2016. But that headline doesn't tell you whether your property should achieve more. It doesn't tell you whether an extra £50 a month will improve your return or leave your property empty for an additional fortnight and cost you more than the increase will generate. It also doesn't tell you how to support rent increases under the Renters' Rights Act. For that, you need local evidence. You need to understand what tenants are paying for comparable properties and how much competition your property faces and what's actually happening within a specific postcode. And that's precisely why we collect this sort of information every single month. In July, Market Update that we produce combines data from the properties that we manage across Cambridgeshire and added to that with Rightmove statistics covering the actual Cambridgeshire postcodes in which we work. So we're not talking about national headlines and we're not assuming it applies equally to every landlord. We look at the market locally. So during July, average one bedroom was £920 a month, and that's 2% higher than a year ago. For a two-bed home, it was achieving, the average is £1,081, an annual increase of 4%. For three-bedroom homes, the average reached £1,308. But those averages change considerably when we examine individual locations. For example, the average rent for a three-bedroom property in P26, well, that was £1,061. In P27, it was £1,332. CB24, £1,471, and that's a difference of more than £400 a month between postcode areas. But it demonstrates why relying on county-wide and average and not what actually someone is achieving for vaguely similar properties 6 months ago can produce the wrong answer. Now, we also monitor stock and activity. Across Cambridgeshire area we cover, 189 properties were let during July, and that was 6% more than in July last year, and also the highest monthly figure we've recorded since January. Every property we advertise attracted an average of 19 inquiries. So on the face of it, that sounds as though almost any property should let immediately. However, there were 19% more properties available than there were a year ago. Demand remains really strong, but your future tenants have more choice. And that means properties which are well presented, well marketed, and priced realistically will attract the best applicants. Something that's overpriced or poorly presented, it'll sit empty. And that's where having the current information becomes so important, because the right rent is not necessarily the highest figure someone is prepared to pay for. It's the figure that attracts a strong applicant within a sensible time frame and delivers the best overall return for you. Now, our data also helps us understand what your future tenants value. Recent research suggests that tenants are particularly attracted to good kitchen worktop space, effective ventilation, large windows, and enough room for a big double bed. And if the property offers those things, marketing should make them clear. We also look closely at the quality, not simply the quantity of inquiries. And although we continue to receive a high number of applications, we are seeing more people with poor credit histories less stable income, or affordability challenges. We're also receiving more applications from groups who need to combine their incomes to make their rent affordable. And that does not automatically make someone an unsuitable tenant, but it makes careful referencing and informed selection more important. The Renters' Rights Act has changed risk attached to that decision. Without Section 21, landlords must be confident that an applicant is suitable before granting the tenancy. If the wrong decision is made, recovering possession could be considerably more complicated and expensive, not to mention time-consuming. And that's why we don't judge a property performance by the number of inquiries it generates. The important question are, where have those applications come from? Can they afford the property? Have their circumstances been checked thoroughly? And which applicant represents the most sustainable choice for the landlord? And monthly evidence also supports the advice we give about rent increases, because under the Renters' Rights Act, rent increases must follow Section 13. And the new procedure needs to be supported by evidence. A landlord cannot simply decide that every property should receive the same percentage increase. The current rent must be compared with appropriate properties in the local market. The location, the size, condition and features, they all matter. And because we record rental values by postcode and number of bedrooms every month, we can see how the market is changing over time. And we can advise whether an increase is justified, what figure the evidence supports, and whether the condition of the property could make that proposed figure difficult to defend. Since the new legislation came into effect, we've already served around about 70 evidence-based rent increases. So far, none have resulted in a tribunal challenge. And that's not because we automatically pursued the largest possible increase, it's because we used evidence to recommend a figure that's fair, realistic, and supportable. And this is the real benefit of collecting our own data month after month. We can see when supply is increasing, we can see which types of properties are in demand, and we can see how rents differ between neighbouring postcodes. But most importantly, we apply that knowledge to individual property in front of us, and that helps us advise you correctly with data-led evidence. Is the current rent still appropriate? Is there evidence to support an increase? And what figure will maximise the return without creating an avoidable void? Marketing is the second thing we look at. How should the property be presented? What features should be highlighted? What asking price will attract suitable applicants rather than simply generating a large number of unsuitable inquiries? And lastly, legislation and compliance. What procedures must be followed and what evidence should be retained? And is the property's compliance history strong enough to support the landlord if that decision is questioned? 4 months now after the most significant change to the private renting sector in nearly 40 years, compliance has become the foundation of almost every decision a landlord makes. But that doesn't mean that residential property is no longer a worthwhile investment. The figures suggest quite the opposite. Rents remain strong, good quality applicants are still looking for homes, buy-to-let lending has remained resilient, and professional landlords continue to invest in new properties. The market is not disappearing, it's just becoming more mature and more professional. Landlords who understand their local market, maintain their properties, and follow the correct procedures still have a considerable opportunity out there. We collect the information because it allows us to give you or keep you, the landlord, informed, property-specific advice about rents, marketing, compliance, and your longer-term strategy. So if you'd like us to carry out a data-led review on your rental value, your compliance position, or your portfolio performance, why not book a call with us? We look forward to talking with you.